They say a mother's love is unconditional, but mine chose my abusive ex-husband over her own daughter. When I was at my lowest point, bruised and broken, desperately needing someone to believe me, she looked me in the eyes and said, maybe if you were a better wife, he wouldn't have to discipline you. That was 3 years ago, and we haven't spoken since. Today, I'm going to tell you the whole story, how the woman who gave me life became the one who nearly destroyed it. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you, please stay with me. And if this story touches your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to Between Hearts, where we share real stories that matter. Growing up, my mother Sarah was everything to me. She was the type of mom who would wake up at a.m. to braid my hair before school, who attended every single one of my soccer games, and who would hold me when I cried over broken friendships. My father left when I was 8, and it became just me and her against the world. She worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, cleaning offices at night and working at a diner during the day. I remember watching her count coins on our kitchen table, trying to make sure we had enough for groceries. Despite our struggles, she always made sure I knew I was loved and that I could achieve anything I set my mind to. She was my hero, my protector, my best friend. Every night, she would tuck me into bed and tell me that no matter what happened in life, she would always be on my side. When I met David at 19, my mom was cautiously optimistic. He was charming, well-dressed, and had this way of making everyone in the room feel like they were the most important person there. He brought my mother flowers on their first meeting and complimented her cooking with such genuine enthusiasm that her face lit up like Christmas morning. I watched as her eyes sparkled. Finally, someone who could take care of her daughter the way she had always tried to but never quite managed on her limited means. David was studying business and came from a well-off family with connections and opportunities that seemed endless. After years of financial struggle, coupon clipping, and saying no to things we couldn't afford, I think my mom saw him as our ticket to stability and security. She would often say things like, "You're so lucky to have found someone like David, and he's going to give you the life I never could provide." There was something in her voice when she said these things, relief mixed with hope, as if all her sacrifices had finally paid off. The first 2 years with David were like a fairy tale straight out of the romance novels my mother used to read during her lunch breaks. We got engaged after 18 months, and my mother was absolutely over the moon with excitement. She helped me plan every single detail of our wedding, from choosing the perfect shade of pink for the flowers to spending hours with me trying on dress after dress until we found the one. I had never seen her so happy and animated in my entire life. She would call her friends and proudly announce that her daughter was marrying a wonderful man from a good family, words that carried extra weight coming from a single mother who had struggled to provide. David was incredibly generous with gifts and attention during this time, and my mother absolutely adored him. He would take us both out to expensive restaurants where the waiters wore bow ties and the menu didn't have prices, and he always insisted on paying with a flourish that made my mother feel like royalty. He made her feel special and valued in a way she hadn't experienced since my father left us all those years ago. But fairy tales don't last forever, and the cracks in David's perfect facade began to show about 6 months after our wedding. It started small little comments about my cooking not being as good as his mother's, subtle criticisms about my appearance when we went out, suggestions that maybe I should reconsider my friendships because they were holding me back from becoming the woman I could be. He would make these remarks with that charming smile of his, so they almost seemed like helpful observations rather than attacks. My mother, when I mentioned them to her during our weekly phone calls, would laugh it off and say, "Oh honey, that's just how men are. Your father used to tease me all the time. It just means he cares enough to want you to be your best self." She couldn't see what I was starting to see, that David's jokes and helpful suggestions were actually calculated attempts to isolate me and break down my self-confidence piece by piece. The man who had swept me off my feet was slowly becoming someone I didn't recognize, and the woman who had always protected me was completely blind to the transformation happening right in front of her eyes. The first time David hit me was on a Tuesday evening in February. And I remember every single detail of that moment like it was burned into my memory with a branding iron. I had forgotten to pick up his dry cleaning because I had gotten caught up helping my coworker who was having a family emergency, and when he came home to find his favorite navy blue shirt wasn't ready for his important meeting the next day, something in him snapped like a wire pulled too tight. The slap came so fast I didn't even see it coming. One moment he was yelling about my irresponsibility, and the next moment my cheek was on fire and my ears were ringing. The physical sting was nothing compared to the shock that ran through my entire body like ice water in my veins. This was my husband, the man who had promised to love and protect me, the man my mother adored and trusted with her daughter's future. For what felt like an eternity, we both just stood there in stunned silence, me holding my burning cheek and him staring at his own hand like it belonged to someone else. Then David broke down crying like a child, apologizing so profusely that his words stumbled over each other in a desperate rush to take back what had just happened. He said he was under so much pressure from work, that his boss had been threatening layoffs, that he hadn't been sleeping well, and that he would never, ever do anything like that again. He held me while I cried, whispering how sorry he was, how much he loved me, how this was completely out of character for him and would never happen again. He kept repeating that he wasn't that kind of man, that his father had never raised a hand to his mother, and that he was ashamed of himself beyond words. The next morning, he was up early making my favorite breakfast pancakes with fresh strawberries, and there was a beautiful bouquet of white roses on the counter with a card that simply said, "I'm sorry. I love you more than life itself." I wanted so desperately to believe him that I convinced myself it was an isolated incident, a terrible mistake born out of stress and circumstances that would never align again in such a perfect storm. The next few days, David was the perfect husband again, bringing me coffee in bed, sending sweet text messages throughout the day, planning a surprise date night at the restaurant where we had our first anniversary dinner. When I called my mother that weekend, I almost told her what happened, but something held me back like an invisible hand over my mouth. Maybe it was shame, or maybe it was fear that she wouldn't believe me, or maybe it was the terrifying thought that she might blame me somehow. Instead, I mentioned that David had been really stressed at work lately and that he seemed overwhelmed. Her response still haunts me to this day. "Marriage isn't always easy, sweetheart. Sometimes we have to be understanding when our husbands are going through difficult times. That's what being a good wife means, supporting your man even when he's not at his best. Your father had his moments too, but I learned to be patient." Her words felt like a weight settling in my chest, making it hard to breathe. 3 weeks later, it happened again. This time it was because I had accidentally shrunk his favorite sweater in the wash, a simple mistake that anyone could make. But David flew into a rage that seemed completely disproportionate to the situation. He didn't just slap me this time. He grabbed my shoulders and shook me so hard that my teeth rattled, screaming about how careless and stupid I was, how I couldn't do anything right, how his mother had been right about me from the beginning. When he was done, he stormed out of the house, leaving me sitting on our laundry room floor, surrounded by clean clothes and broken dreams. I sat there for hours, trying to understand how my fairy tale had turned into such a nightmare, and wondering if this was what my mother meant by supporting your man even when he's not at his best. After the sweater incident, I started walking on eggshells in my own home, analyzing every word I spoke and every action I took through the lens of whether it might set David off again. I developed an elaborate system of checking and double-checking everything, making sure his clothes were perfectly pressed, his meals were exactly the way he liked them, his schedule was managed down to the minute. I became a ghost of myself, tiptoeing through my own life, constantly anxious and hyper-vigilant. The worst part was that I started to believe some of the things he said about me. Maybe I was careless. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough. Maybe if I could just be better, more organized, more attentive, he would go back to being the man I fell in love with. I stopped seeing my friends as much, partly because David discouraged it, and partly because I was ashamed of what my life had become. My conversations with my mother became increasingly surface level during this time. When she would ask how things were going, I would give her the highlights. David got a promotion. We were thinking about redecorating the living room. We might take a vacation in the summer. I couldn't bring myself to tell her about the fear that had become my constant companion, or how I had started hiding makeup in my purse to cover bruises, or how I would sometimes sit in my car after work for 20 minutes, gathering the courage to go inside my own house. When she would mention how happy I seemed and how proud she was of the life David and I were building together, each compliment felt like another brick in the wall I was building between my real life and the life she thought I was living. I was protecting her from the truth, but I was also protecting myself from her potential reaction. What if she didn't believe me? Or worse, what if she did believe me but told me it was my fault? The isolation became almost complete when David convinced me to quit my job about a year into the marriage. He framed it as wanting to take care of me, saying that I was too stressed from work and that he made enough money for both of us. "I want my wife to be happy and relaxed," he would say, "not worn down by some thankless job." At first, it felt like a luxury sleeping in, having time to keep the house perfect, maybe even pursuing some hobbies I'd neglected. But soon I realized that without my job, I had no independent source of income, no daily interaction with people outside of David's circle, and no reason to leave the house on a regular basis. I was financially dependent on him and increasingly socially isolated. When I mentioned to my mother that I was thinking about looking for part-time work because I was getting bored at home, she surprised me by discouraging it. "Enjoy this time while you can," she said. "Once you have children, you'll be grateful David can provide for the family. Not every woman is lucky enough to have a husband who can support her." Looking back now, I can see how David systematically stripped away every source of support and independence I had. He would make subtle comments about my friends, how Sarah was too dramatic and always bringing negative energy into our lives, how Jessica was clearly jealous of our happy marriage and was probably trying to cause problems. He would schedule romantic dates or important events on nights when I had plans with friends, putting me in the position of having to choose between him and them. When I would choose him, which I did more and more often, not wanting to deal with his sulking and passive-aggressive behavior, he would act like it was proof of how much I loved him, but I started to realize it was actually proof of how much I feared him. My world became smaller and smaller until it was just David, the house, and my weekly phone calls with my mother, calls that were becoming increasingly strained as I ran out of safe topics to discuss and ran out of energy to pretend that everything was fine. The breaking point came on a Saturday night in October, almost 2 years into our marriage. David had been drinking at a colleague's retirement party, and when he came home, he was in one of his moods, that dangerous combination of alcohol and simmering anger that I had learned to fear more than anything else in the world. I had spent the day cleaning the house from top to bottom and had made his favorite dinner, hoping to head off any potential conflict, but nothing I did was ever enough when he was in this state. He started in on me about something trivial. I think it was about how I had arranged to throw pillows on the couch, but within minutes, his voice was rising and his fists were clenched. When I tried to calm him down, to speak in the soothing voice that sometimes worked to de-escalate his rage, he exploded with a violence that was unlike anything I had experienced before. He didn't just hit me this time, he grabbed me by the throat and slammed me against the kitchen wall so hard that I saw stars. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, could only claw desperately at his hands as he squeezed tighter and tighter. His face was twisted with a rage I had never seen before, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he was actually going to kill me. When he finally let go, I collapsed to the floor, gasping and choking, my throat on fire. But he wasn't done. He kicked me in the ribs, called me every degrading name he could think of, and then grabbed a handful of my hair and dragged me across the kitchen floor like I was nothing more than a rag doll. The physical pain was excruciating, but what hurt even more was the realization that this was my reality now. This was what my marriage had become, and I didn't know how to escape it. The next morning, I was a mess of bruises, cuts, and emotional trauma. My throat was so swollen I could barely swallow water, and there were finger-shaped bruises around my neck that no amount of makeup could cover. David had left early for a golf game, acting as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't nearly killed his wife the night before. I sat in our bathroom, staring at myself in the mirror, and for the first time in months, I saw myself clearly, really saw what I had become. I was a shell of the confident, vibrant woman I used to be. My eyes were hollow, my face was gaunt, and there were bruises in various stages of healing all over my body. I realized that if I didn't get help soon, David was going to kill me, either intentionally or accidentally during one of his violent rages. I needed to tell someone, and the only person I trusted completely was my mother. With shaking hands, I took photos of all my injuries with my phone, something I had never been brave enough to do before. The pictures were horrifying evidence of what my life had become. I documented the bruises on my neck, the cut on my lip, the handprint-shaped bruise on my arm where David had grabbed me. Then I called my mother, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. When she answered with her usual cheerful "Hello, sweetheart," I almost lost my nerve. But then I looked at myself in the mirror again, at the woman I had become, and I forced myself to speak. "Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper because of my injured throat. "I need to tell you something about David. He's been hurting me. And last night, Mom, I thought he was going to kill me." The silence that followed was so long and heavy that I wondered if the call had been disconnected. When she finally spoke, her words changed everything between us forever. "Sweetheart," my mother said, and I could hear her sighing deeply on the other end of the phone. "Are you sure you're not exaggerating? I mean, David is such a gentle soul, and he loves you so much. Sometimes when we're upset, we can make situations seem worse than they actually are." Her words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I couldn't believe what I was hearing from the woman who had raised me, who had always been my protector. "Mom," I whispered, my voice breaking, "I'm sending you pictures right now. Look at what he did to me." I hit send on the photos I had just taken, my hands shaking so violently I could barely operate the phone. There was another long pause, and I could hear her breathing heavily. When she spoke again, her tone had changed, but not in the way I had hoped. "Oh, honey," she said, and there was disappointment in her voice, disappointment directed at me, not at David. "What did you do to make him so angry?" The question shattered something inside me that I didn't even know could break. My own mother, looking at photographic evidence of my abuse, was asking what I had done wrong. I tried to explain through my tears, told her about the pattern of violence that had been escalating, about how I lived in constant fear, about how I needed help to get away from him safely. But with every word I spoke, I could feel her pulling away from me emotionally. "Listen, sweetheart," she said in the tone she used to use when I was a child and had disappointed her. "Marriage is hard work. It requires sacrifice and compromise from both partners. David provides for you. He's given you a beautiful home, and he comes from such a good family. Maybe you need to think about what you can do to be a better wife to him. Have you been keeping the house clean? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you being supportive of his career?" Each question felt like another knife twisting in my heart. Here I was, covered in bruises, barely able to speak because of the damage to my throat, and my mother was asking if I was doing enough housework. The final blow came when she said the words that would end our relationship forever. "Maybe if you were a better wife, he wouldn't have to discipline you like this. Men need respect, and if you're not giving him the respect he deserves as the head of your household, then maybe you're bringing this on yourself." I felt something die inside me at that moment, the last vestige of hope that my mother would choose me over the illusion of the perfect son-in-law she had created in her mind. Through my sobs, I managed to say, "Mom, he almost killed me last night. How can you say this is my fault?" Her response was cold and final. "Stop being so dramatic. David would never seriously hurt you. He loves you too much. You need to go apologize to your husband and figure out how to fix your marriage instead of running to me with wild stories." The line went dead, and I realized that the woman who gave birth to me had just chosen my abuser over her own daughter. After my mother hung up on me, I sat on my bathroom floor for what felt like hours, staring at the phone in my hand and trying to process what had just happened. The woman who had raised me, who had taught me to be strong and independent, who had always told me I could come to her with anything, had just abandoned me in my darkest hour. She had looked at evidence of my abuse and decided that I was the problem. The pain of that betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound David had ever inflicted on me. But in that moment of absolute devastation, something else began to grow inside me, a cold, hard determination. If my own mother wouldn't help me, then I would have to help myself. I wasn't going to die in this marriage, and I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life being anyone's victim. I picked myself up off that bathroom floor and made a decision that would change everything. I started making a plan with the methodical precision of someone who knew their life depended on it. First, I called the domestic violence hotline and spoke to a counselor who helped me understand that what was happening to me was not my fault, something I desperately needed to hear after my mother's reaction. The counselor helped me develop a safety plan for leaving David, including finding a shelter, gathering important documents, and creating a way to leave without him knowing. I began secretly saving money by returning small purchases and keeping the cash, selling jewelry he had given me to pawn shops in different neighborhoods, and even picking up change I found on the street. Every dollar felt like a step toward freedom. I also started reaching out to old friends that David had driven away, slowly rebuilding the support network that he had systematically destroyed. It was terrifying and lonely work, but for the first time in months, I felt like I had some control over my own life. The hardest part was accepting that my mother was not going to be part of my new life. Every instinct in me wanted to call her back, to try to make her understand, to somehow win back the unconditional love and support I thought I had always had from her. But I realized that her love had never been unconditional. It was dependent on me playing the role she wanted me to play, being the daughter who married well and lived the life she had dreamed of for me. The moment I deviated from that script, the moment I became inconvenient or complicated, she withdrew her support. I made the painful decision to cut contact with her entirely. I changed my phone number, blocked her on social media, and accepted that the woman who gave birth to me had chosen my abuser over me. That choice said everything I needed to know about who she really was and who I needed to become someone strong enough to survive without her. 3 weeks after my mother betrayed me, I was ready to leave. I had everything arranged, a place to stay at a women's shelter, important documents hidden in my car, and enough money saved to survive for at least a few weeks while I figured out my next steps. David had no idea what was coming. To him, I was the same broken, compliant wife I had been for months. I timed my escape for a Tuesday afternoon when David would be in back-to-back meetings and wouldn't be able to leave work early. I had practiced this moment in my head 100 times, but when it actually came time to walk out that door, my hands were shaking and my heart was pounding like a drum. As I loaded my few belongings into my car, I felt like I was shedding an old skin, leaving behind the terrified woman I had become and reclaiming the strong person I used to be. But David came home early that day. I heard his car in the driveway just as I was carrying the last bag to my car, and my blood turned to ice in my veins. He walked into the house calling my name in that deceptively cheerful voice he used when he was trying to catch me doing something wrong, and when he saw me standing there with my suitcase, his expression transformed into something terrifying. "Going somewhere, sweetheart?" he asked, but there was nothing sweet about his tone. The rage was building behind his eyes like a storm gathering strength. I had two choices. I could lie, make up some excuse about visiting a friend, and hope he believed me, or I could tell him the truth and face whatever came next. For the first time in our marriage, I chose courage over safety. "Yes," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "I'm leaving you, David. I'm done being your victim." The words felt powerful coming out of my mouth, like I was finally reclaiming my voice after months of silence. What happened next was the most terrifying and liberating moment of my life. David flew into a rage like nothing I had ever witnessed before. He grabbed for me, but this time, I was ready. I had pepper spray in my hand and didn't hesitate to use it. As he stumbled backward, cursing and clawing at his eyes, I ran to my car and locked the doors. He pounded on the windows, screaming threats about what he would do to me, promising to hunt me down and make me pay for embarrassing him. But as I drove away, watching him grow smaller in my rearview mirror, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Freedom. I had faced my monster and survived. I had chosen myself over his control, my safety over his rage, my future over his threats. The woman who had once been too afraid to speak up for herself had just walked away from her abuser, and nothing he could do or say would ever make me come back. That was 3 years ago, and I have never spoken to my mother since that devastating phone call. I've built a new life for myself. I have a job I love, friends who support me, and most importantly, I have my self-respect back. Sometimes people ask me if I miss her, if I ever think about reaching out to repair our relationship. The answer is complicated. I miss the mother I thought I had, the woman who raised me to be strong and independent. But that woman was an illusion. The real woman, the one who chose my abuser over her own daughter, who asked what I had done to deserve being nearly murdered, that woman I don't miss at all. She showed me who she truly was when I needed her most, and I've learned to accept that some betrayals are simply unforgivable. My mother taught me that love isn't always unconditional, but she also inadvertently taught me that I could survive even without her love. If you're watching this and you're in a similar situation, whether it's an abusive relationship, a family member who won't support you, or anyone who makes you feel like you're not worth protecting, please know that you are worth so much more than how they're treating you. You deserve love that doesn't come with conditions, support that doesn't waver when things get difficult, and people in your life who will choose you even when it's inconvenient. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who are supposed to love us unconditionally, and that betrayal can feel like the end of the world. But you can survive it, just like I did. You can build a new life surrounded by people who truly see your worth. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to Between Hearts. Sharing these stories helps other people realize they're not alone. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you're stronger than you know, and you deserve better than what you're settling for.